And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Echo down to nominal.
Fighting downside SPD off. Bring in SPD off. Off. It's orange!
Orange 25! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If the methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You bet. Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Yikes, you bet, concur. It's time for another fantastic episode of NASA Spaceflight Live. Welcome, everybody from around the world. I'm Jack Beyer, your host for today. And as always, we are doing our standard NSF Live thing, but today is special because we have a fantastic guest, the ever awesome Mr. Eric Berger. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon here in Houston, Texas. I'm doing great. Love to see you, Jack and Adrian.
Cool deal. And as Eric just said, we're also joined by Adrian today, so should be a fair amount of chaos on today's stream. Adrian, how are you feeling? Are you feeling chaotic?
I'm always feeling chaotic if I'm on stream with you, Jack, as you know. So I'm looking forward to the next 90 minutes. I think it's going to be awesome.
Excellent. Good deal. Well, as you all know, if you have been tuning in to NSF Live, maybe you don't know, we do a standard Q&A sort of thing here. So if you have any questions, throw them in chat. I've got a little screen. Every time you see me looking over here, I'm looking at your questions. Just type at NASASpaceflight and throw your questions into chat, and we can discuss. But let's start off with the giant steel elephant in the room, or I guess at the launch pad, Starship. I mean, Eric, you have been following SpaceX for, a long time. You literally wrote the book on them, or books on them. So, I think this is as good a time as any for us to sort of take a step back and sort of look at the playing field. I'm sure everybody out there is just like, what's going on? They removed the hot stage ring. What happened at Starbase? So why don't we just jump right into that? Right now, well, you know what? I'm going to take a step back. Maybe some of our viewers don't know who you are. Would you give us like a short elevator pitch for Eric Berger?
Sure. I'm a longtime space journalist and just really got excited about commercial space a little more than a decade ago with starting to see what SpaceX was doing with the Falcon 9 rocket. And so I write for a website called Ars Technica and write stories almost every day there about just everything that's happening in space. My principal interest is in sort of this commercial spaceflight revolution that we're in the middle of. And a couple of years ago, I published a book on the Falcon 1 called Liftoff. Elon Musk in the desperate early days that launched SpaceX. Really went back and talked to all the early employees about kind of those very harrowing early years and failures that got the company off the ground finally. And for the last couple of years, I've been working on a book about the Falcon 9 era. And it's the first draft is done. It's pretty good. So hopefully it'll be published in about a year from now.
Oh, that's exciting. In the same way, I don't know if you saw our episode with Ashley Vance, but in the same way that when I read both of his books, I was just like, man, I'm sad. I want more. It was the same way with Liftoff. Like, all I wanted was more of those little tidbits and anecdotes, because so often you wish you could be a fly on the room or a fly on the wall of the room when some of these decisions are made. So I'm definitely check out Eric's book if you haven't. And so the next one comes out in a year or so?
We're targeting September of next year. And it's about 50% longer than Liftoff because there's a lot happened in the last 10 or 15 years with SpaceX. So it covers basically the origin of Falcon 9, goes pretty deep into the early launches, the failures, obviously, CRS-7 and Amos 6, a lot of in there about the recovery from those, and then the early Dragon development. That first cargo mission to the space station was really a pretty wild ride, and then through the Demo 2 mission, just to sort of, as you say, take readers inside the room where these decisions were made and where the launches happened, and just it was, the Falcon 1 era was so scrappy and was so just slapdash and putting things together, but that never really stopped. Like that same mentality persisted into the Falcon 9 development. It was just so kind of, it just scrappy really is the word to describe it.
Yeah. So, man, I have to wait a year for that? No! I want it now!
I know.
But yeah, there's Liftoff. I realized I had a copy within arm's reach of me, so get it, buy it. It's a good book. It's a great book. All right. So Starship, am I right? It hasn't launched yet, clearly. I'm still here in South Texas. We're still waiting for it to launch, and FAA approval, Fish and Wildlife approval. There's sort of a lot of things in the works. So, and Adrian, I feel like you haven't, jump in if you want at all, Adrian. But we'll start with Eric. What is your sort of take on the state of play right now?
It's really interesting, Jack. A few weeks ago, a month ago, it looked like September was a realistic possibility.
Yep.
And then something happened, and I'm not sure what on the regulatory side happened, but now it's very clear that the earliest launch date's the end of October. I think, October 31st is when the FAA has said that they're going to try to get the paperwork done by, and that's consistent with what I've heard from a couple of sources at SpaceX that are working through these issues. And so it's just going to kind of be a wait and see game. I'm not super pessimistic. If the FAA administrator is out there talking about how they're going to try to get it done by the end of October, I don't think he would put a date on it unless he was pretty confident in that.
Right.
But it does seem like we're going to have to wait another 4 to 6 weeks at least to see this fly.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And yeah, you and I, we met at, we'd already met, but we saw each other at the Virgin Galactic Galactic 02 launch, and we were sort of, doing what space media does, where we're just like, hey, you think it's gonna go? What do you think? And I think we both. Oh, I need to send you this picture, by the way. I still haven't sent you this.
Do.
That's my bad. But yeah, so we were both thinking at the time, September seems like it could happen in September, but unfortunately, like you said, things have sort of changed a bit. Adrian, go ahead.
I remember talking to somebody at late August, and they asked me, hey, I have an event coming up late October, early November. Would that conflict with Starship? And I remember at that point being very confident and being like, yeah, I feel very confident about September. And as Eric said, I feel like everybody that watches Starship felt very confident about September. It felt like not that much done. Everything's lining up. We went through the boxes, checked everything, and then suddenly you're now in the situation where, if somebody would tell you right now it will not fly before November, I think people would not even be that surprised. Let's be real. If we are talking about late October, suddenly we are talking about November is very much also a possibility. So, right. Yeah. And we also have the situation that SpaceX has started to work on stuff about Starship again. We saw the removal of the odd staging ring. So it's a really interesting playing field right now.
Yeah, interesting is the right word for it. I mean, perhaps even around that time frame, SpaceX was confident that they would hit September, and regulatory issues, what have you. So we're waiting on the FAA. We're waiting on the Fish and Wildlife Service. FAA has said hopefully before the end of October, which, yeah, I would agree with you, Eric. I don't think they would be putting out even a vague date unless they had, sort of a timeline internally laid out. But I guess that makes the final unknown, or one of the final unknowns, the Fish and Wildlife Service. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is reevaluating the water deluge system and determining, what if anything needs to happen there. And what was it? They said that they would take a maximum of 135 days, which doesn't mean it will take exactly
Yes.
135. It could be less. It could. Go ahead, Adrian.
So the basically they're saying is they will take up to 130 days, but they also said that at any point they or the FAA could decide to extend it. So it's a bit of an unknown, and they're I feel like they're just basically putting the regulatory statements out there and basically saying, hey, this is what we are allowed to take. And they, in contrast to the FAA, they didn't put October there. They were like, this is what we can do. Nothing said besides that.
Right.
I think something else to also consider as a concern on schedule would be the impending government shutdown, which does look like it's going to happen. And this could be one of those things where it gets resolved over the weekend and everyone goes back to work, or this could be a real line in the sand where Republicans in the House decide that, no, they're going to have this fight and it's going to take a while and it's going to be pretty ugly. The last time we had the government shutdown, it lasted for several weeks. And really what broke it was the fact that the flight controllers on the East Coast, the flights just started getting way backed up because the flight controllers weren't getting paid and they stopped showing up for work. And so this could be another thing that delays the regulatory review process by weeks. I think day for day, essentially, that the shutdown happens, and that's due to kick off next week or later this week.
Fun.
And you also have the situation where there might not be a direct implication where the agency tell you, no, it's critical, it's not impacted, but you have then all of these feeder infrastructure, like related infrastructure that suddenly starts to shut down. And I tried to ask Fish and Wildlife if they would, if that would delay their process. And as of now, they say no comment. They cannot say if it will delay. That's literally what they told me. They cannot say if it has any impact right now because they probably don't know the full implications yet.
Yeah, there's a fine line between essential workers and non-essential workers and what gets done and what doesn't. And it's the kind of thing that sometimes those decisions really aren't implemented until it actually happens. So it's just sort of adds to this uncertainty in the timeline. And I would just say that people are frustrated out there who want to see the rocket launch. I think everyone watching the stream wants to see Starship launch. But, these regulatory processes exist for a reason. And it is important to protect people on the ground, to protect fish and wildlife services. And this takes longer, I think, than people would like. But the rules do exist for a reason. And, while some of the rules may be antiquated, I know that when SpaceX was trying to do the Starhopper flights, the odds of there being a problem with Starhopper in terms of damaging or threatening life on the ground was if they launched it every day from the year 1100 to the present day, then there was a 1 in 10 chance or something that something bad would happen. So these rules are pretty stringent and SpaceX has to meet, but all of the launch companies have to meet them. So it's not you see a lot of commentary about how this is the Biden administration or the Trump administration or whoever or Boeing is or NASA's out to get SpaceX. It's not really the case. I've talked to a number of these FAA officials, and they are actually trying to help these companies navigate these regulations to get to the point where they can launch. So it is we are talking about the world's largest explosive ever built, right? That's really what Starship is. Rockets are bombs. And this is the largest bomb ever built. And so it's we are a democracy, and this is kind of the process through which we get these approvals. And it's slow and it's not as fast as we would like, but it does exist for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, safety is good, and being a good steward of the environment is good. And we just have to sort of temper our desire to see cool things happen rapidly with, that knowledge. The government shutdown, I'm not even going to start, but go ahead. You look like you were about to say something, Eric. Let's just shift gears there.
Yeah, I don't think we really want to get the politics of the government shutdown, which I think is very distressing and disturbing.
Yes.
But, I think it's important to remember, too, that once SpaceX demonstrates it's a safe launch of Starship, then this process becomes much more smooth.
Right.
The reality is that with the Falcon 9 rocket at Florida, they went through this whole process of like one of the hugest impediments to getting to launch frequently there was working with the Air Force and then the Space Force on things like automated flight termination system. And, so if they can demonstrate safe operation of Starship, then they can get to much more frequent flights. But these are really experimental flights. And we saw it with the first one, right? All of the debris and dust and dirt kicked up by that launch. And then the 43-second or something like that delay in the flight termination system. Frankly, I'm surprised that hasn't led to more issues. So, we'll get there. And that's a lovely video of the Falcon 1. Thank you for showing that.
Wrong rocket, Patrick.
That is not the Falcon 9. I mean, that's not the Falcon. That's the Falcon 9.
I also have to add to that, like when I initially, like when I think Elon said it, confirmed it on Spaces on a space that FTS was delayed, and that was my initial feeling. I'm completely agreeing with you there. My initial feeling was, oh no, like of all the things that could have gone wrong. An issue with the FTS and like a delay of the FTS, I expected a much longer and much more delaying new certification process, because I would imagine that of all the systems that could fail, that's the one that the FAA probably pays the closest attention to, because in the end it's the failsafe.
Right.
Yeah, I think they're benefiting because they're not launching from like the Eastern Range. Because then if you had the Space Force involved, I think it would have been much more of a lengthy process.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, Eric, we're still sort of at the beginning phase of this, where they're trying to roll the boulder up the hill with all of these experimental flights, and once they, like you said, prove that it's a safe system, the boulder will start rolling downhill. I mean, it's a weird metaphor. I apologize for that, but if you look at what they're doing in Starbase, if you look at the number of vehicles that they're building, there's like 6 ships, like 4, 5 boosters. It's insane. I mean, they're very clearly getting ready for the point where they can start firing these things off rapidly. And we're going to get there. I mean, we're absolutely going to get there. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
I
agree.
Let's do a couple questions really quick. I have to do this. I have to. I'm sorry. But Mark asked if you were planning another book, and you said you were. You said it's coming out in September. Everyone in chat rejoiced, as they should. And I know it's not even out yet. It's a year till you said that you're trying to have it come out, but where did that other question go? Somebody was asking, are you going to do a third book about the beginnings of Starship? Because I think we would all really like to know sort of what's going on in that realm. You don't have to announce anything. You can demur, but just putting that out in the universe. If this next book does well, which I assume it will, consider maybe doing another one.
Well, I have to tell you that after the second one was really hard because there were so many moving pieces going on, and there's lots of things to write about and try to interweave in there. And so I need a break. I do have plans for a sort of quasi Starship related book within the next 5 years, but I think the Starship story
hasn't been told
really
yet.
Just hasn't been told yet. I mean, I really want to see where that vehicle ultimately is taking us before trying to write a book about, where it began. Because if it is launching payloads to Mars within 5 to 10 years, and then maybe that's the point at which to start. But I think you've got is it truly an interplanetary vehicle? Can you really land humans back on Earth in it? Was it successful as part of the Artemis program? I mean, I think as part of that book, you'd want to talk to the astronauts who actually went down to the moon and back in it. So that book, I probably will write that, but it's a ways in the future, man. I do have, there are some pretty fun little stories about the early days of Starship in the Falcon 9 book. But now it's just kind of very, very tangential. Like I talked to the first 2 site directors down there and got some stuff about that. But I'm very much focused on the Falcon 9. Because, I mean, everything everything they did with Falcon 9, they just put into the Starship program. I do know, I get a little tidbit. Everyone knows the line, the best part is no part, right?
Right.
And that I did find the origin of that, and that was the highly complex propulsion tanks that they were trying to develop to make propulsive landing on Crew Dragon, excuse me. And that was just, Elon ultimately abandoned that because there were lots of reasons, which I'll go into. But he was determined basically that when they were going to tackle the propulsive landing problem for Starship, that it was going to be as simple as possible. So they tried to put those lessons into the vehicle.
Nice. Excellent. That's a good tidbit. But good question there from Ross. All right, let's go back a little bit. I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but we got some really good questions coming in here. Do we think SpaceX will add more launch pads in Texas eventually? Do we think that's something still on the table, or do we think that's sort of another one of those things that's like far in the future?
So first of all, plans change at SpaceX all the time, because at one point they were going to do offshore landing pads, and the rigs, haven't they stopped working on those? I thought I saw that maybe they
sold them. They sold them even.
They sold them, yeah. Yeah, so plans change all the time. Like you saw with the competition between Florida and Texas, early on in the Starship days, and ultimately they just said, no, we're all in on Texas. It's whatever sort of at that moment in Elon's mind is the quickest path to wherever he wants to go. He'll change and follow and go that direction. My sense is that there won't be more launch pads from Texas, because it's a really constrained space, right?
It really, yeah.
Driven down. You really can't fit much more there. So you could see the two orbital launch mounts they have, and I can see that sort of being it. But as to what ultimately, because when they're going to do flights to the moon or wherever, they're going to need to be popping off lots of these Starships to fill up their depots in orbit. Yeah. And so presumably they're going to need more than 39A and one or two in Texas, but where those ultimately are, I don't know.
Come on, Slick Six. Come on, Slick Six. Have you been to Slick Six, Eric?
I have not been to Slick Six.
Oh man, I hope. So if y'all don't know, Slick Six was a former Delta IV heavy pad. It's at Vandenberg. SpaceX is now leasing it, which made me very happy because I am a Slick Six stan. I hope they don't change it too much. It's a great pad. It's maybe the best pad. Anyways, I'm gonna get chat yelling at me. But
the original Vandenberg pad that they had there Elon initially told them to build that for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy.
The pad there at Slick 4.
Yeah,
I would still love to see West Coast Falcon Heavy. Like if I'm putting my dreams and desires in a more sensible place, I will not think about Starship at Slick 6, and I'll think about Falcon Heavy at Slick 6, and gosh, that would be amazing. But I digress.
I think at this point, your wishes are probably more likely to be Starship than Falcon Heavy. Even I think, I feel like Starship is the more reasonable bet, because at this point, an expansion of the Falcon Heavy infrastructure feels like, yeah, it could happen. But I could also see them being like, oh, we have Starship around. They might try to wiggle around that. But Starship, I mean, I could see Starship pads being everywhere where you can launch rockets if it's successful.
Yeah, I mean, even in
go
ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say that at one point Elon was all in on Starship, right? Like, we're going to get to Starship as quickly as we can and drop Falcon, drop Dragon. I'm highly confident that they're going to be flying Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy for a long time. So I would think that you will see Falcon Heavies from Slick 6. And Starship will come on, and they will eventually sort of take over. But the Falcon rockets are going to fly for a super long time.
That's actually, Eric, you're just answering questions out of our queue here left and right, which is amazing. That was a question from Ross asking, how long do you think until Falcon 9 is eventually retired? And I would agree. It seems like it's got...
24.
I mean,
2040 maybe. I mean, I think it's going to fly forever. It's the best rocket in the world. I mean, there's no question. Like, it is the lowest cost, highest performing vehicle. I mean, just look what it's done, this year. I mean, it's taken on basically anyone in the Western world who needs a satellite launch that wasn't on a manifest 2 or 3 years ago has to fly Falcon 9. And it's just they've been able to scale up those operations and take on those missions. If you talk to the European scientists who launched on Falcon 9, the Euclid Space Telescope, I mean, they were like gobsmacked by the operations that they observed in Florida versus what happens in French Guiana at Kourou when there's Ariane launches. It's the efficiency of that vehicle. It's going to take a long time for Starship operations to match Falcon 9, and even then, some missions you'll want to put on Falcon 9.
Well, and
I feel like,
go ahead, Adrian.
I feel like at this point we are in a situation where Falcon 9 feels like the most sophisticated rocket ever created. It's just the flow that SpaceX has gotten, where other launch providers are like, "Yay, we are already launching the 4th time this year," and they're doing that tweet in like August, and SpaceX is like, "Yeah, that's cool. That's our 3rd week in January." That's like,
right.
It's we have like 4 or 5 days pad turnarounds where you even sometimes start to lose track how many Falcon 9s are flying, and honestly, I mean, who would you launch on? It's always the question. If you have a medium to heavy payload right now, it's Falcon 9. There's no Ariane, there's no really Atlas available, there's Delta is no longer available, you have no other thing that flies. You kind of have to go Falcon.
Everyone but India is transitioning to a new rocket. In Japan, they're going to H3. ULA is trying to transition to Vulcan. Europe's transitioning to Ariane 6. And so that leaves the GSLV Mark III or LVM Mark III, now they're calling it, in India, is like kind of the only other rocket. And that too is coming back from an accident, so it doesn't have a very robust cadence yet. And yeah, it's just this weird time where if like Rocket Lab had come out with this Neutron vehicle, this year or next year, man, they would be killing it, absolutely killing it.
Yeah, and we have some Rocket Lab talk that we're going to get into here in a minute. But I just want to, as we were talking about, and you saying a few minutes ago that SpaceX has been rolling everything they've learned from Falcon 9 into Starship, in that same way that they've learned so much about propulsive landing, reuse, refurbishment, all of that with Falcon 9. To me, it's like, why would you stop flying it? Why wouldn't you fly it, like you said, into the 2040s? Because all of the lessons that they will learn from operating a fleet for that long and getting 20, 25, 30, however many flights on a booster, that's just going to be like priceless data for when they get to the point where Starship is hoping to reach a similar cadence. So yeah, that makes sense. Let's see here. Where did that question go? Here we go. Outdoorsman Show is asking for Eric. With Rocket Lab's failure this past week, do you think the FAA will be done with the review faster than SpaceX will with concern to the Fish and Wildlife Service review? Okay, that question went off the rails. I only read the first part of it before I asked it, so that's my bad. But
I got the gist of it. They're probably asking if Electron is going to be flying before Starship flies again. I think so. I don't have the data right in front of me, but Rocket Lab has moved pretty quickly in the past. This is their 4th failure now, so not great in 41 flights. But they will move quickly. I have a high amount of respect for Peter Beck and his team, and they'll work closely with the FAA. I suspect that they will be back up and flying within a few months. Now, it's going to be close between that and Starship. We could do a poll. What's going to fly next first, Electron, Starship, or Vulcan? And I'm not sure what I would pick at this point.
Can we throw New Shepard into the mix to make it even more spicy?
I would vote for New Shepard because I was told they're going to fly next month.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't announced that mission yet.
Wow. Okay. Well, hopefully they can get back in the air. They meaning Blue Origin and also Rocket Lab. We were talking about it. I'm going to call back to the Virgin Galactic O2 launch. We were chit chatting, and I think you said something, Eric. Like, I'm trying to paraphrase this properly. You said like Virgin Galactic is now the leader in commercial human suborbital flight. And I was just like, it took me aback for a moment because I feel like for a while there, I think people were sort of giving that label or title to Blue Origin, and it's now been over a year since their last mishap.
Yeah, it's been a year and a year and almost 2 weeks since the NS-23 failure, and they've said almost nothing. They are going to fly an uncrewed mission, I was told, in early October, mid-October, payloads, and then the next crew mission would be maybe February, no earlier than February of next year. For the first time they put people back on New Shepard. In the meantime, Virgin Galactic has been flying almost every month, people, and it's actually been pretty impressive. They've stuck to that cadence. We'll see if they can hold it. But I said they were the suborbital space tourism leader, and I think they are. I mean, they are flying a lot more people to the edge of space now than Blue Origin is.
Yeah,
and frankly, 2 years ago, when Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos had their little
fly off,
who went to space first.
Yeah,
I certainly would have put Blue Origin vastly far ahead of Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, go figure. But I mean, you love to see it. It's been a long time coming for Virgin, so it's nice to see them with that cadence. Did you get the old factory tour when you were there?
I did, yeah.
Did you note how many motors they had laying around?
I did not see the motors. How many did they? You tell me.
So I was there for Galactica 1 also, and that's when I got the tour. I got into town late for Galactica 2, so I didn't get the tour then, but I assume it was the same one. When you go up into that little area above the hangar and you can sort of see it. Yeah. I saw 3 motors, and I think we're at the point now where they would have been using the last one of those for this next month's flight. But clearly, they are in a place where they have a cadence that they're trying to hit, and they've so far, like you said, been doing really good at hitting that. And so hopefully that continues.
Well, for the first time last year, they came out with some guidance, and they said we're going to fly. They basically laid out their test plan to get back to commercial operations by the second quarter of this year. And I wrote a fairly nasty article basically saying they've never done this before. They're still losing money. Don't believe a word they're saying. And their new head of communications called me up. He was initially pretty angry. He wanted to speak to my editor, and I said, "Hey, dude, I'm the editor." So it's but I said, if you guys stick to what you're saying you're going to do next year, then I'll write a completely different article, because it'll be the first time you guys have put out a timeline and stuck to it. And they did. And I have, since then I've written, hey, look, they've got a plan. They're sticking to it, and they're doing really well. So, I mean, I'm impressed by what they've done over the last 6 to 12 months. Hopefully they can keep it up, because the world's a better place, I think, when you have frequent suborbital access to space. I mean, you're going to see, when I was out there, Jack, I ran into Alan Stern, who was out there, the New Horizons manager, and who is going to fly at least a couple flights on Virgin Galactic, because he tells me that, if you want to do science comparable to this, you need to buy a sounding rocket, right? And he said it costs about 10 times more to do a sounding rocket than it would be to take an experiment, a telescope or something or whatever on the Virgin Galactic plane. And so he said that it's actually very cost effective from that standpoint. So there's a lot of potential in the platform if they can keep flying it safely and frequently.
Yeah, to your point, the world is a better place when we have frequent and dependable suborbital access to space. It's even just from the sheer standpoint of more people appreciating the fragileness and beautifulness of this one singular planet of all in the solar system that we can inhabit, that has liquid water and breathable air and trees and wildlife, and it's just so amazing and fragile and beautiful when you see it, I imagine, from even suborbit. And the more people we can get to sort of have that overview effect sort of thing happen, I think the better. I know a lot of people are down on Virgin Galactic and things like that, like, oh, it's just a billionaire's ride to space. And it's like, no, don't quit being. I am very cynical. Okay, if anybody knows me, I am extremely cynical. Just shut that
True.
part of your brain off in this case, and just be happy that more people can hopefully experience and then transfer that I guess epiphany to others, because it's just humanity needs that. We need that.
I mean, the critics are right. These are billionaire joyrides. I mean, that's what they are. Virgin Galactic is $450,000. I think Blue Origin ticket prices are still over $1 million. But this is a necessary step on the evolutionary path to getting humans, off this planet in a sustainable way. We've been talking about space tourism for decades, and it never had happened until 2 years ago, and now it is happening. And so you have to walk before you can run, and so we're starting to walk into space.
Yeah, and cars were expensive at first, computers were expensive at first. Literally every new technology is expensive at first, and then it prices come down over time. At least you hope. Go ahead, Adrian. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just wanted to add, I'm also enjoying these for funny statistical side notes, because you recently saw a spike in how many people were the most amount of people in space, and then you have like these small statistical side notes suddenly where like, no, for 5 minutes and on this October 2022 it was actually this number, and I'm enjoying this for just also these statistical notes that suddenly have to appear everywhere, because that makes it fun.
Absolutely. The records are changing all the time.
More asterisks, more better? Question mark? Cool. Well, let's keep on rolling here. Adrian, if you see any questions that you are dying to ask, please be my guest. I am also taking a look here at the question queue.
I have one.
Go. You look so excited.
I saw this question. I don't see it in the panel yet, but I will ask it. Was there a difference, Eric, when you did the Falcon 1 research versus the Falcon 9 research, and access you would get regarding the programs? Like, is there a change in SpaceX that makes it harder?
So during the Falcon 1 book, I had total access to Elon and everyone who had worked there and still worked there. And so that really opened the doors. I had less access for the Falcon 9 book, but fortunately I had made all of these tremendous sources during writing Liftoff. And so I talked to many, many dozens of people who worked there, did the most critical roles at SpaceX. So yeah, and I mean, the story for Falcon 9 goes back to 2008. And so, almost all the people that worked there worked there during those times don't work at SpaceX anymore. So,
right.
But it's Elon's, one of the things I struggled with, frankly, in writing the second book was, Elon's behavior over the last year, with the purchase of Twitter, becoming increasingly politicized, his attitudes and things like that kind of are out there. And so, one of the fundamental questions I'm trying to answer is how much of the success of SpaceX over the last 10 to 15 years is because of Elon and how much is in spite of Elon. And I think the majority of it is because of Elon, but certainly there were some very critical mistakes that were made, during the last 15 years that, I think you could chalk up to him or his decisions. And so it goes pretty deeply into that, and we just saw that, recently, right? With we talked at the opening of this show about, we don't really know when the second Starship launch is going to happen. And a lot of that is due to the regulatory issues with the lack of a water deluge system. And, that was a decision he made like 3, even 4 years ago to try to, to see if they could get away with launching Starship with this orbital launch mount idea that did not have a sophisticated deluge and flame duct kind of system. And that obviously has been a serious issue for them to confront, and I think is one of the reasons why we've seen sort of this pretty significant delay after all the problems with the launch site after the first liftoff. Yeah,
that makes sense. I mean, wow, you're selling this thing hard. I know you're not even trying to, but this is the sort of thing that I want to know as a person. I want to know how much do we ascribe to the figurehead at the top? How much do we ascribe to the grunt work from workers? What is, sort of the mix there? What is the balance? Because, a lot of times you hear, let's just take a different example. Steve Jobs. People are like, Steve Jobs didn't invent the iPhone. He was just the billionaire that ran the company and, sat in the boardroom. And it's like, well, no, but yes, but no. Like, the truth isn't always black and white. And it's really fascinating to sort of peel apart the onion and figure out, quite what happened and why things were the way they were. I mean, I know I've heard people say that, let me put it this way. I have heard people lament decisions that Elon has made as stupid or counterproductive. I've also firsthand seen that decisions he's made has made things more productive or, made things happen faster. So that's really fascinating. I can't wait for this book. Give me a time machine, man.
It's complex. It's a hugely complex issue. And I will say that, like, the really big decisions, by and large, have been absolutely the correct ones. Like, the whole issue around load and go. This is basically because the propellants, you have to have super chilled liquid oxygen. And so it just, in the Florida heat, it just warms up like this, right? So you've got to load the rocket with densified liquid oxygen and then launch. And then if you don't go, your LOX is too warm and you have to recycle. It's 24 hours. And so that's why, like, whenever there's a launch now, like, if they don't hit their initial launch time, whatever it is, they're not coming back for 24 hours just because they've got to go through the whole detanking and process and so forth. There was such a huge pushback from NASA against load and go with basically loading the vehicle with astronauts on board. And he took an inordinate amount of shit from the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, the International Space Station Safety, all these different safety panels were screaming at Kathy leaders in NASA to saying, do not approve this, do not approve this, do not approve this. And now it's like taken for granted. And it was this absolutely essential thing to making the economics of reuse work. And that was his decision. He stuck by it the whole way. And he was absolutely right about it. And he's been wrong about some things too. I won't go into that. But to people who say Elon is an a-hole or just can't run any companies, I will just point to SpaceX and say, look, the way startups work is a founder comes in with a ton of energy and he brings around sort of these true believers who sort of put their all into making this company work, and they're this hugely disruptive force in the industry and they change things. And SpaceX did that with the Falcon 1 and the Falcon 9 rockets. But they didn't then become Lockheed or Boeing, right? They remained this hugely disruptive force with Starship. And I mean, it just sort of like pushing every day to do something amazing or they operate more satellites than any company or country in the world by a factor of 10 with Starlink. I mean, it's just amazingly disruptive company. And the reason that hasn't stopped is because Elon is still the CEO. That is his DNA. Now compare that to like Blue Origin. Blue Origin for a time was like this young disruptive company, but now they've become basically Boeing to some extent. And that's because they've lost their founder's mentality. And so it's just, if you value SpaceX as this disruptive force in the space industry that's bringing down the cost of launch, that's opening up new avenues of exploration in terms of cost of access to space and the sort of increasing the possibility of what we can actually do in space because of that, then you have to value Elon Musk and what he's done to SpaceX. Take all the other stuff that you may not like about him, or the fact that he's an extremely demanding manager and has some real deficiencies in that area. You cannot separate the fact that SpaceX is this hugely disruptive, successful force that is almost solely because of Elon.
Excellent. I couldn't have put it better. Adrian, sorry. I just on this vein, we talked about very briefly, you got an angry phone call from a comms person at Virgin after writing an article, and you sort of had this shift in, from writing the first book and having all of that access to this new one where, maybe some of that access went away a little bit. little bit inside baseball, but like as a space journalist or a journalist in general, how do you temper sort of wanting to say the emperor wears no clothes versus maintaining your access? Like that's a heck of a fine line to walk.
It's a very challenging line. There's this very famous thing called access journalism, where you sort of cover people in the way they want to cover in order to maintain your access. You saw that a lot with you see that a lot in politics, right?
Yep.
And so the fact of the matter is, I try to write what I think is the truth. And for a long time, that has meant, if you look at the achievements of SpaceX, it's hard to write super critical stories about the company, right? Because they just continue doing amazing things. Now, there's times when I've been critical about them, like back after the Amos 6 accident in 2016, I was like, why is he talking about going to Mars when they can't put 2 people into orbit on Dragon? And I said, you should really focus on Dragon. And I've criticized much more recently the decision not to publish webcasts on YouTube, even though that's good for you guys, since you guys are now
Can I just say, I am not happy about it. Believe it or not, I am not happy about it, because we used to get mission control audio. We used to get nice high resolution video. There's sort of, this is so inside baseball, but there's like sort of some things you can do to divine when we should go live based on what their YouTube channel is saying they're going to go live, and if there's a delay, sometimes you can sort of glean that from the time on the YouTube stream changing before they like update the website, or there's just all kinds of things where we just lost all of that. And it's, I mean, I'm hopeful that they'll be able to reconstitute it all on Twitter. I'm never going to call it X, sorry. Hopefully they'll be able to reconstitute some of that or all of that on Twitter over time. But yeah, just to immediately just shift over to Twitter without having any of that in place or any of the infrastructure. Anyways, all right, that's enough inside baseball. Adrian, do you remember what you were going to chime in about? Because you can chime in now. I'm done with my nonsense.
I think I just wanted to add that I think SpaceX approach even makes them more vulnerable for critique, because they tend to push boundaries and also just try things out. And of course, you saw that with Falcon 9, for example, with Load and Go, and also with their whole cryogenic approach, because that led to a lot of scrubs. A long time in the early days, Falcon 9 was known for having launch countdown scrubs, because it was a very complicated process. It was very, if you're out of the temperature range, you're scrubbing. You basically set yourself up for a lot of failures. Of course, in the long term, you benefit from it, but in the short term, you're kind of exposing yourself to more critique from the public because you're trying more. And I think that's an approach that sometimes also is now happening with Starship, because they are using a very experimental approach with the biggest rocket of all time. And of course, you will see more failure with that. You will see more things going wrong, and you then have pictures of a rocket blowing up, and that sets you up for more critique from the outside.
Yeah, that's the whole.
Go
ahead, Jack.
I mean, just talking about.
I was just going to say that's.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. Go. I'm not talking.
That's just the whole mindset change of iterative design, right? And that's just the quintessential way of SpaceX has done development. NASA started building the first Artemis 1 rocket back in 2014. Like, I remember going to Michoud and seeing structural tests and even some flight test hardware for a mission that flew, 8 years later. And in 2014, SpaceX was trying to figure out, how to fly version 1.1 of the Falcon 9, get that going. And so, I mean, it's just iterative design. You fail, you learn, and then you just sort of take all those learnings and put them into operations. And they did. Adrian, you're absolutely right. They struggled hugely in early 2016 with getting the timing right of propulsive, not propulsive, densified oxygen and load and go. And they kept going faster and faster. And Elon kept saying go faster and faster and faster, because if you launched right when you finished loading, then you got so much more performance. in the vehicle. And they kept like squeezing that timeline and modifying. And that's ultimately what caused Amos 6 was the fact that they were trying to just sort of keep modifying and shortening the time it took them to load propellant onto the vehicle. And they just sort of hit that unlucky spot where they had these buckling in the COPV liners that led to the explosion on the pad.
Right. There was, man, it feels like ancient history at this point. There was like some solid oxygen in the composite overwrap because it had buckled and created a space for it, and it froze because they loaded it extra fast, and then pop. Bad pop,
Yeah.
to use a technical term. Let's see here. Let's do some more questions. How about?
Very funny story, by the way, about the guy who actually had to go ask ULA if he could see where they thought the sniper was shooting from. So I talked. To him.
I have heard this story. Dude, I cannot wait to read your book. Why do I have to wait a year? Oh,
Pick it up with the publishing industry. Yeah,
fair. Maybe someone needs to buy a publisher and disrupt the. No, I'm stopping. I'm going to stop. Let's see here. Do you think, Eric, SpaceX will launch and land Falcon 9 20 times or even more? Do you have any sort of inkling on what the upper bound might be there?
I think they've said that they're going to get to 20 times, but they just did 17, right? I think they'll push to 20, and that may be it. I think the thing they're trying to balance is they have this superb safety record now, right? I don't know the number. It's like 200-ish launches in a row that have been successful. Yeah. And I would try to keep the numbers, but then it would just change 3 days from now. So I mean, it's not really. They've launched like 230 or sometimes since Amos 6 failure, and they don't want to break that, right? You don't want to stand down. I mean, because if they did have a problem with one of these stages, they'd be down for a few months, and that's a lot of money. So they're not they're not going to push these first stages just for the sake of pushing these first stages. I think as long as they're convinced they can do it safely, they will. And they may get to the point where after 20 launches, they said, well, we're starting to have some structural concerns. But they do swap out engines. They change parts and stuff in the vehicles between flights. So they're but I think 20 is a good number, and then they'll reevaluate it. Maybe they'll go higher, maybe they won't. At the end of the day, if you got 20 flights out of a core of your rocket, you did pretty well.
Yeah, pretty dang well, like kind of astonishingly well. And then you can use it for that 20th flight on a mission that requires, an expendable use, and then bingo bango.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Alex is saying in our back channel, 236 missions.
I got the first two digits right. I feel pretty good about that.
You did. Although I really like the 230-ish. That's like that's a good unit.
Can we use that as a quote in the next few live streams? Because we, of course, also sometimes on air forget the exact number, and it's like, how many successful launches did they have in a row? Alex?
Yeah, while you're waiting for Alex to type, you can just say I mean, I've done it.
I have an astronomy background, so I studied astronomy, and so like the way we were taught was with these huge astronomical numbers. If you were within an order of magnitude, you were basically correct. So like SpaceX has done 20 or 2,000 launches in a row successfully, and that's for an astronomer.
Love it. Let's see here. Going back to Starship for a moment, or maybe for a while, who knows? Paul Kelly is asking, how do we feel about the odds of a third Starship flight in 2023? I was previously saying that we could totally get there, but that's sort of back when we felt like September was a pretty solid time frame for Flight 2. If Flight 3 is slipping to November, I don't know. What do you think, Eric?
I think you would have to. Launch by the end of October, and then you would have to have a nearly flawless flight, including something splashing down, near Kauai in the Pacific Ocean to smooth the regulatory way. I also think SpaceX is going to want to get a lot of data from this hot staging ring and all that, and that could be a complete catastrophe because it's really hard what they're trying to do, or that could be a complete success. And I think they're going to want to do some work on that before the next flight. So I think the odds of 3 flights this year are pretty low. It's probably about the same, as I don't know, but I think we'll see one more flight this year, and then hopefully next year we'll see 3 to 5. And if you look at the history of rocket development programs, I mean, you typically have one flight 1 year, and then the next flight is 6 to 18 months after that, and then more delays, and then you finally sort of eventually get into some kind of a cadence. And so you look at these plans for like Vulcan, Ariane 6, New Glenn to sort of really ramp up operations quickly for the Kuiper, Amazon's Project Kuiper launches, and I'm scratching my head thinking, no rockets have ever done that before. So you've got these big rockets, and they're just all going to do that. It's very difficult for me to see that. Similarly with Starship, it's going to be a learning process.
Yeah. Let's. I mean, go ahead, Adrian.
The whole Falcon Heavy situation, because we had the demo flight, and then everybody was like, "Where's Falcon Heavy?" Because there was this amount of time that you just need to ramp up, and I think it's. I would be surprised if like some of these launch providers right now are very optimistic about timelines, of course, because also they want to sell it to people that like good timelines. But in the end, every big rocket has a ramp up going through. Of course, you could argue that things like New Glenn or like Starship that are built with a bit more scalability in mind, they maybe have a quicker ramp up. But we'll see.
This is definitely.
I don't think New Glenn is. I was just going to say I don't think New Glenn is going to have a quicker ramp up. I mean, those first stages are enormously expensive. I don't have a great number for you, but they really do want to start landing those right away and reusing those. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of effort. I mean, SpaceX did not land start landing rockets until 20 flights in, and Blue Origin has fantastic engineers, and take nothing away from them. But the idea that they're going to start landing right away with refurbishable rockets that can fly again. I mean, SpaceX didn't refly its first landed rocket. So I think it's going to take quite a bit longer to get New Glenn ramped up than the current projections are, whatever they are.
That's exactly the question I was going to ask. So thank you. You read my mind. Here's another Starship question. River Dave Kenny is saying, why did they disassemble Starship? So we saw them a couple days ago taking the hot stage ring we just mentioned off of the stack. Do we have any inkling into what the heck is going on there? Adrian, you look like you have thoughts. Oh no, Eric, go.
No, I was just going to say I don't have an inkling into that specific thing. My guess is that they have more time to do checks and more work, so they're going to take that time. But honestly, I don't know.
Adrian?
So I think the first disassembly of the big stack was we heard actually Katie Luters in a talk at South Parallel, I think, talk about it a bit, that they are one of the reasons is the FTS work, but there's also other minor related work. I think she referred to it. Of course, with them now also taking the hot staging ring away, I think there might also be. I think this will be probably related to some inspections. I think this is a very high watch item, so maybe they're taking the chance if they right now they have access to it because there's not a ship on top. So why not use that situation right now, remove it, look at it further, maybe improve some little bits about it if you see something. It's a good opportunity for them. And I mean, they said they're, like Elon said before, they're hardware ready, but of course there's a difference between hardware ready to fly and you don't have anything you could improve anymore. So they might just use the chance right now to work on these optional items.
And the other thing is they are constantly assessing the health of the vehicle, right? They have all these sensors on it. They're always looking at it. They're doing final camera checks. I mean, they are looking over this hardware every day. And so maybe they saw something in there that they wanted to go look at, or maybe they saw there's something they wanted to go check. I mean, you see this all the time with the Falcon 9 too. They say, well, we're standing down for 24 hours to do additional checks or whatever. That's just a BS catchphrase or catch-all. But they are constantly monitoring the health of the vehicle, and they may have seen a valve or something that they didn't like, or they may have seen some moisture on a camera, inside there that picked up something, and so they wanted to go look at it. It's without being there, it's impossible to know. But they are constantly looking for things to go assess further.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it should be mentioned. It seems kind of obvious, but this is the first hot stage ring that they've had as part of a full stack, and they put a ship on top of it, and it sat there for a little bit. And at the very least, why would you not, if you have extra time, want to take a whole bunch of really close looks at that hot stage ring after it's been stacked? Did it deform at all? Did it perform the way you expected it to? Does maybe certain areas need reinforcement, or just maybe they're just adding more sensors? Who knows? But
it's worth saying too that they've never had a hot staging ring on any of their vehicles: Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, Starship. So this is like entirely brand new for them as well.
Yep. And like you said, it's extremely hard to do. Okay, we have a question here from someone named John Cross. John Crass? I don't know who this person is. They want to know about our definition of success. Like, what do we expect in terms of Flight 2 and how it goes, and how do we define success for Flight 2? I'll let you go first,
Well,
Eric.
for someone who looks the wrong way at rocket launches, this is a great question. So Stephen Clark has come to work for ours a few months ago alongside me to do space coverage. He's done great, fantastic. But he and I have had this very discussion, like we should write a story before the launch saying, this is what we think is mission success. Because after the first launch, everyone was like, oh, it's a huge failure. That idiot's rocket blew up, and other people like saying, no, actually.
Killed the minivan.
Yeah, right. And other people are saying, no, it's like they got off the pad and didn't destroy it, and that's success. So what we came up with is if they get to second stage ignition, right? That is success, because you would have had at least a mostly nominal, if not completely nominal, first stage flight, and you would have gotten data on these hot staging separation mechanism, right? And then I think that is enough to say, okay, you've learned a lot from this flight. You're ready to go to Flight 3.
Yeah. Adrian, do you have any thoughts here?
Absolutely agree. I think the main item that they want to test is A, the booster and like the deluge system. So you test that at liftoff, and B, the hot staging ring. And for me, a complete test of the hot staging system would be the second stage ignition, because at that moment you can verify that A, your staging worked. That's good. And B, you probably can look if the engines will continuously fire without being destroyed by the ricochet from the hot staging and like the enormous powers that might impact the Raptors. So I think I fully agree. Second stage ignition, possibly separation. If you get to that point, I would call from a SpaceX perspective or from like a public view perspective, everything else a bonus. Of course, to add to that, the FAA would see it differently, because if you fail at that point, the FAA will still call it a mishap and start an investigation. So there's that.
But if you don't if you don't have all of the detritus and debris and damage at the launch site, then and you're losing this miles out over the Gulf of Mexico, it's a much easier. You've got fewer parties involved, like the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, first off, Adrian, I have to go back to something you said. Ignition without separation, still a success?
If it assists, so the system. What was the reason why it didn't separate? Because at that point you have the Raptors firing it. It should separate. Like if it doesn't separate, I have other question, because like how did it manage to not separate?
Right. I'm giving you a hard time. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think none of us really expects Starship to like successfully and completely re-enter should it get that far. I think, you can just look at the tiles and the newness of the whole entire system and say, yeah, probably not a standard re-entry on Flight 2 should they get that far. So, I mean, that would be great, don't get me wrong. But I think I think that's a really good a milestone. Stage SEP, ignition of the ship engines. That's I like that. That's a good definition of success for Flight 2. Good question there from whoever asked that. I don't even know who that was. Let's see here. Adrian, do you have any questions that you wanted to jump into? I'm looking at the queue here.
Yeah. Well, that's a question here from Adrian. Not me. I want to point out, not me.
Sure.
There's
Sure.
also the question about the. It's really not me.
I believe
about
you.
the impeding. Yeah, totally. Because I'm using this to segue questions to Eric. What do you think about the impeding lawsuits against the FAA that also are lingering around and I mean, so far not have done anything, but what's your take on them, Eric?
My take is that they're probably not going to be showstoppers. I'm not a legal expert, but my sense is that since the parties weren't seeking an injunction or haven't asked for an injunction, that's probably not the primary concern. Now, whether the Fish and Wildlife Service, points to these and says this is a reason why we can't do this or whatever, but the fact that the FAA is seemingly more or less on the side of SpaceX with regard to these lawsuits, I think that that's probably a good thing for SpaceX.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty significant indicator of how that'll all go. Let's see here.
I like this one.
Go.
Does Eric think that SpaceX is sufficiently along in the process to meet their HLS commitments?
Oh, that's a good one.
I mean, they're going to meet their HLS commitments. The question is really one of timing. And the fact of the matter is that NASA doesn't have any other alternatives to Starship at this point for the Artemis program. It has Blue Origin's lander as the second option. And that's great. I mean, I actually love the design of the second Blue Origin lander. It's fully reusable with the tug between low Earth orbit and the moon. Lander goes up and down. And I think that's with hydrogen, that's a brilliant architecture. I actually have a lot of confidence in the program manager, a guy named John Caloris at Blue Origin, who's running that program. He was actually the mission director for the COTS Demo 2 mission. So the first Dragon mission to the space station back in 2012. He led that from SpaceX's side. And that's great, but they are a long way from flight or from hardware. I mean, we're talking about, it would be difficult for me to see the Blue Origin lunar lander ready to go before a decade from now. Maybe a little sooner, but they have a long way to go. So it's Starship or bust, and NASA obviously has put a lot of eggs into the basket of the Artemis program. It's basically the entirety. It's about half of their budget to some extent or another. So they are invested in seeing its success. So I think I'm confident SpaceX will succeed, but it's not going to happen in 2025. It's probably not going to happen in 2026. It's not going to happen in 2027. Probably going to be later in the 2020s. I will say this. SpaceX has recently winnowed its priorities for Starship down to just two things. So it's number one is getting to orbit successfully and flying with Starlink. So basically getting to the point where they can deploy operational Starlink satellites. Very important for the economic health of the company and that program, which ultimately, of course, Starlink unlocks the way to Mars eventually. And then the number two priority is HLS. So they've got a big focus on that, but they've got a lot of work to do. They've got a lot of interim steps, just getting to orbit, and then you've got to demonstrate on-orbit propellant transfer, and then you've got to demonstrate on-orbit propellant storage, because LOX and methane is not going to just sit there happily in the sunshine and wait, months and months for you to show up.
Right.
And then you've got to do all these things with lunar operations, and SpaceX has never operated vehicles around the moon or tried to land on the moon. And then you've got to do all the life support things that makes NASA happy, and that took a long time during Crew Dragon. And so it's going to be a while. And I don't think we should beat SpaceX up too much for that, because these programs take a long time, and they just got the contract, a little more than 2 years ago. So we're really sort of more toward the beginning of Starship HLS than the end of Starship HLS. It's going to be a while. People need to be patient, but it definitely will come. And like I said, it's not like NASA has any other options. If it's going to go to the moon anytime in the 2020s, it's going to do so on Starship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Khalid is asking, how is SpaceX's current financial status? We just sort of just mentioned this. With all the projects they're pursuing, is Starlink generating enough revenue right now to cover costs? I think we just I forget where I saw that Starlink is now...
Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal recently reported internally on the finances. Micah Maidenberg had a great story, basically showing that SpaceX was profitable by a little bit during a quarter last year. SpaceX does not have problem raising capital in the private markets. So they are going to get, assuming that the economy does not completely go into the dumpster, which there's no indication of that, assuming we don't get into like some global conflict, and assuming Elon doesn't do something like truly horrible that I don't want to speculate about because I have no idea. But if things continue more or less the way they've been going, SpaceX is not going to have funding problems. You can see that by the rate at which they've moved in South Texas. This is basically like the rocket program Elon Musk has always wanted to have. He had no resources, or virtually no resources during Falcon 1. They were extremely resource constrained during Falcon 9 development, very resource constrained during Falcon Heavy development, like seriously resource constrained. And now they've got resources. And so you're just seeing them spending money out the wazoo in South Texas with all these vehicles, all these launch pad infrastructure. And so I don't think funding is a real problem for SpaceX, at least in the near term.
Yeah, I mean, with the success of Falcon 9, they're kind of like the golden boy a little bit. Like they're able to essentially print money, like you said, in the private markets. And so, I mean, at some point that chicken will come to roost, but that's so far down the line at this point. They have so much runway, which is good because, I mean, as someone who makes things, this is kind of off the rails, sorry. Like, as someone who makes things, I could make really cool things if I had, infinite resources. I could get this camera or this lens or what have you. And sometimes working under constraints is good and makes you more nimble, or you try things. But also, sometimes having those extremely deep wells of resources is good because, I mean, just look at the number of vehicles they're building here in South Texas. I mean, once they get everything down and start figuring out how to get these things like soft landing in the ocean, goodness, I mean, they're just kind of, it seems like they could just flip a switch and just start sending these things left and right, which really they need to do to meet those commitments to the Artemis program and to figure out all of the things that, Eric, you were just talking about them needing to figure out, propellant storage, propellant transfer, lunar operations, all of these things, ECLIS. So it just really, it feels like, the chessboard has been set and a couple pawns have been moved and we're all kind of being like, checkmate already, but it will come. It will come. Let's see here. Sort of in a similar vein, Bill P is asking, do you think Elon is still 100% confident in the future of Starship? I feel like if he wasn't, he would have thrown it out and shifted gears in some way. Do you have any other, I mean, how do you feel about, I'm asking you how you think Elon feels. It's sort of a nebulous question, but what is your read on his commitment to the program?
Well, I think he's fully committed to Starship. He's been that way and will continue to be, but it will be an evolutionary type program like we saw with Falcon 9. You had version 1.0 with the octagon arrangement of engines, like tic-tac-toe arrangement of engines, and then they went to the more octaweb version with Falcon 1.1, and then Falcon Full Thrust was, they had densified propellant and much more thrust, and they extended it, and then you had an upgrade to that, and then you had Block 5. And so I think you'll see different iterations and versions of Starship going forward. This is not the end-all, be-all of the Starship you see now. Will look primitive in 5 or 10 years when we're looking at whatever Starship's on the launch pad.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I mean, even just look at The SN8 through 15, those now look primitive compared to what we're looking at. Even in it's a smaller way, but even the original flight stack, 7 and 24, that to me now looks pretty dang primitive compared to the current vehicle. I mean, the raceways look so much better, the tiles look so much better, even just the addition of the hot stage ring. Like it I don't know if this is just my weird brain, but the stack looks more complete with that little interstage in there, and less primitive, I guess is how I would put that. So that's a really good point. The Starship we see today will not be the Starship that we see in 5 years or so. Adrian, go.
I think the engine section of the boosters is for me the biggest thing that screams they're still changing so much. If you look at Booster 4 and compare it to Booster 9 now, and the whole engine section and the area around the engines, Booster 4 looks janky. Like that was like if you look at that looks so weird compared to how complete Booster 9 looks. Booster 9 looks like a proper designed rocket aft end, and it's day and night. It's really that there was no shielding on Booster 4. Booster 4 had just like the engines dangling around there somewhere in the aft end, and I mean that would have been fun to see fly, I have to say, but I'm looking forward to see Booster 9 fly because it feels so much more rocketry.
They're literally making this shit up as they go along. like no BS. Like they are.
Go ahead. I'm doing censor. I censored you after the fact. It's fine.
Oh, sorry. Good.
But yeah, no, they are significantly figuring things out as they go. That is no kidding. Let's see here. Oh, I had a point I was gonna make, and then I just completely blanked. Here we go. Adrian, this is not you, right, Adrian? Can you confirm? Has a question.
It's not me. I'm not asking questions while I'm on air. For sure. I'm not doing that.
Sure. Adrian, not our Adrian, is asking, what does Eric think about the recent report by NASA saying that SLS is unaffordable? Does he think there will be a radical change in the program? Eric, I love you, man. You are not afraid to call things what they are. And I know that there are people in the SLS community that have a little bit less than love for you. But you know what? When the emperor wears no clothes, you say the emperor has no clothes. So let's get a little spicy. What do you think about this? Adrian, are you okay? Go ahead.
So I will say that my career, if it's known for anything, has been criticism of the SLS rocket. Going back to its origin in 2010, 2011. That was the first thing that got me really upset about it. Was actually sitting in a living room with Chris Kraft, who was NASA's first flight director, was long retired, he's 90 years old, and he was angry as hell about this SLS rocket, and shared some of that anger with me. So I did a story on that most recent report, and damn it, if it didn't do 1 million visitors. It's a phenomenally successful story. Nice. I mean, NASA has known this rocket is unaffordable from the beginning. And the politicians have understood that. And it's just kind of been this kabuki dance that no one has really talked about it. But what was striking to me about that was that not only did the Inspector General get NASA was it the Inspector General or GAO? I'm not sure. I think it was the IG. But the Inspector General basically, someone at NASA said, okay, yes, it's unaffordable. And, that's not something that NASA officials really say publicly. So it was pretty striking to hear that. I mean, it is unaffordable. It's we're talking about having an Orion and upper stage and SLS rocket on the pad. That's $4 billion investment, whether you build it now or build it for next year or the year after or whenever. It's a $4 billion launch is completely unsustainable if and when Starship and New Glenn are flying regularly. Until that time, it is the best approximation of a reliable rocket and spacecraft we have. And Congress is going to keep on funding it. NASA is going to keep on funding until an alternative steps up. And now, fortunately, we live in an era when that is actually happening. And that's thanks to Elon and Jeff Bezos. I mean, they are the ones who are putting up private capital to build these revolutionary new launch systems. And hopefully within the next few years, they'll come online. But until then, we're doing things the old way, which was take all of the best defense contractors in the United States, give them billions of dollars and tell them what you want to build, and then keep changing your expectations and requirements. And eventually you get a vehicle on the launch pad that works. It's just a slow, expensive process. It's how space was done for 50 or 60 years. And if we want to do more in our lifetimes than send a few astronauts to the moon and back with flags and footprints missions, then by God, we need revolutionary reusable launch. And we're finally getting to that point. What frustrates me about the SLS is that for a decade, it basically held back this future that we're now entering, right? So we all agree, I think, that on-orbit refueling of propellant storage, this idea of gas station in space, reusable launch, reusable in-space vehicles.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Depot.
Yeah, depot, right? I mean, literally, you could not, if you were at NASA, you could not say the word depot because it would offend Richard Shelby, the senator from Alabama, whose center, Marshall Space Flight Center, was building and designing the SLS rocket. So it held back that era that we all know that I think most of us want to get to of low cost, affordable, reliable, reusable space flight. It was just the throwback to this past era, and nothing against the SLS rocket. It was a magnificent launch to behold in 2022. I was there. I felt proud as an American to see it take off. It obviously performed flawlessly, but it is a thing of the past, and it frustrates me to no end that NASA is investing billions and billions and billions of dollars in upgrades that aren't coming online for 5, 10, or 15 years that are completely unnecessary with what Starship and New Glenn are going to be bringing to the table.
Yeah, it's sort of hopelessly frustrating, but at least there's alternatives on the horizon. That, like, imagine if there weren't, it would just be horrible. I don't even want to think about it.
I mean, here's the thinking exercise. Here's the thinking exercise. Just think, if SpaceX didn't exist, we'd all be pointing to Blue Origin and say, "Oh my gosh, this is the revolutionary, paradigm-changing company."
Yes.
Right. Yeah. That's
everybody would watch the Cape right now with eagle eyes about the test tanks they are having right now. Jarvis would have been like the space news. And also, just to talk a bit about the Artemis and SLS discussion before that, I feel like as a European, it's also a very weird situation, because on the one hand, it's the program that for some reason allows us maybe to get European foots on the moon for the first time. Like it's a way to get that. It's our way to be in this program. On the other hand, it's also money that we could spend on developing an actual sustainable and good rocket program that we are right now spending on the US. And it's like there's the resources that are going there that we are trying to get to the moon, which we also need for our own infrastructure. And right now, let's just say I also think Europe is not really doing a good job at managing their rocket launch vehicle capabilities. Yeah, it's also a different, like, it's this thing where you're like, I'm glad SLS exists because that's the reason we get European foots on the moon probably soon, but
Yeah. Money, timelines. Why does time have to exist, Eric? Why? I just want things to happen soon. Whether it's your book or Starship or just boots on the moon, like, we only get to live so long. And
so let me give you a piece of advice, Jack, as someone who just turned 50. Live in the moment, my friend. Live in the moment. Great things will come in the future, but live in the moment. Don't throw away those seconds that are passing you by now.
I mean, yes. If I could, like, pick a character trait, like I was playing D&D or something. Hi, Adrian. I really would enjoy the ability to do that, and I do try. I don't always succeed to live in the moment. So often, I mean, I'm extremely fortunate. I get to see and do such cool things. But it can be challenging. I mean, so I just flew with the Polaris crew. What was it, a week ago? And I know you also did last year. You got to fly in the MiG, you lucky dog. And one of the questions that I found myself wanting to ask either Jared or Kid or Cyan is just how do you do that? How do you ensure that while you are participating in extraordinary things, that you are fully able to internalize that and appreciate that, and not get lost in the minutia of the day to day, or the technical aspects of flying a jet? Like, we did a loop. We flew through a canyon. Like, I'm trying to think back. Like, I don't remember looking around and thinking, "Holy cow, I'm flying through a canyon." I look at my footage and I'm like, "Holy cow, we flew through a canyon." But I was sort of in like work mode, focus, get good photo, get good video, and it's a challenging thing. I don't know. I'm just waxing philosophic at this point, but thank you for the words of advice. Is that my Instagram? I should really.
Yeah, he told your Instagram.
Oh wow, he pulled my Instagram. All right, well, yeah, I should
Good job,
post that
Patrick.
stuff. We need to get that stuff on the channel. I'm working on it. But anyways,
Also, I want to
somebody in
point
chat.
out.
Go ahead.
I think you hit a very important point there, because we have this situation, we all three, that usually when we get to witness things that a lot of people would be very happy to witness. And that's just a fact. Like, a lot of things we see, rocket launches, people we meet, that's things that a lot of people would want to see. But every time we do it, we are in work mode. Every time we have these situations, we are in a situation where we have to interview somebody, we have to record something, we have to learn something right now. And I think that really makes you miss to appreciate like how lucky it is to witness some of these things. I met Artemis 2's crew, there's a fly here, last week. And I was like, you do interviews and everything, but of course, meeting the next people who go to the moon, like, how awesome is that?
Right. Yeah, and it's, I mean, oh man, like, it's a job, right? Like, I love doing this. I love seeing every single rocket I can launch, but I'm working when it happens. I'm pointing a camera at a thing and trying to do a good job. I'm not standing there like with my memory banks on, like, really trying to. I don't know. Eric. What's your take?
Well, that's the advantage, I guess, of being a writer. Is like whenever I go to these things, like I'm the guy on vacation where like my wife's like taking pictures or whatever, or of whatever we see, the views or the stars at night, and I'm never taking pictures. I'm just sort of soaking in. And that's kind of how I do rocket launches, things like that. But I guess that's a benefit of being a writer, because you sort of watch it and see what happens and sort of get a sense of everything around you and maybe take some notes and then write about it later. I guess but that's what I try to do. I like sort of try to just soak it all in, and it's more difficult if you're trying to capture it on photos or videos, and the work you all do is absolutely amazing, I have to say.
Thank you.
But you should every now and then, I'm not saying start a diary, but you got to write down some of when you have like a great experience, like riding in the plane or capturing something particularly special or seeing the Milky Way or whatever. I would write it down. And just so you can go back and read it 10 or 15 years later, because it will, in reading that, even long into the future, it will call to mind those visual memories that you captured and what you felt, what you smelled, what you saw. It will just come all flooding back. That's really the power, I think, of the written word.
That's a really good suggestion. Thank you. And I hope nobody takes what I was saying as me lamenting the awesome things I get to do. And I mean, half the joy of this job is seeing the launches and experiencing that stuff. The other half of the joy, maybe even more than half, is bringing this stuff to people around the world. I mean, we try to be people's eyes and ears out in the field, and so it's just, anyways. I'll
be extremely disappointed. I'll be extremely disappointed if you're not on the moon when that first Artemis 2 Starship is coming down, to film it. for us and get us those views back to.
It's like I now imagine that like the Artemis landing. It's like, and we are throwing it to Jack in the field, being on the moon right now.
yes, yes, that's what I want.
What I would
expect.
give, what I would not give for that. Oh my gosh. All right, well, it's 3:30 Central Time. It's 4:30 Eastern. Typically, we go about an hour and a half, and we want to respect your time. But if there's anything we didn't hit or didn't mention throughout the course of this that you feel we would be remiss if we did not, Eric, take it away, man. I know I'm sort of putting you on the spot, but
I would just say that it's over the last 10 to 15 years I've really been writing about space. The amount of stuff happening has exploded, and there's just all sorts of really cool and amazing stuff happening. But we didn't talk about Stoke Space, and I would just say that their hop test was really super cool, and they're trying to build a reusable rocket from the start. And I think that's pretty awesome. So I'm eager to follow their work. And we didn't really talk about Vulcan. They are, I think, getting closer to their first launch. And I'm excited about that. And we've got lunar landers, commercial lunar landers launching Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic probably within the next couple of months. I think that's very exciting. And so there's just a lot going on. It's fun to be, as you said, Jack, it's fun to be in the middle of it and being alive at this time.
yeah, couldn't disagree. And yes, I'm the Stoke hop. We didn't even talk about the Stoke hop. That was so cool. Oh man, what I wouldn't have given to be there for that. But you can't be everywhere at once. Wow. So what you're saying, Eric, is there's so much cool stuff happening in the near future that we should have you back on soon.
Absolutely. Whatever you guys want.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, I do need to thank our members. Thank you to our launch directors and flight engineers, and also people that subscribe to my Instagram. But no, for real, our members, we could not do what we do without you. It's absolutely so heartening and so amazing that y'all support us. And it's key. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you to our launch directors. Thank you to our flight engineers. Thank you to all of our members. Thank you to people who follow me on Instagram, Neon Heat Disease. I'm just going to say it. It's there. I'm going to plug it. Eric, do you have anything you would like to plug? Everybody should read this. If you haven't read this, read this. Oh, well, I'm not on screen anymore, but I'm holding up the book. There we go. Read this. Buy it. Do it. Anything else you want to plug, Eric? Your coverage at Ars is absolutely amazing.
No, Ars Technica is the best place to find the work I'm doing, and Stephen Clark is also there and doing excellent work. We really try to bring insightful, thoughtful coverage of make sense of the spaceflight world that is happening around us. So that's probably the best place to follow us. And I'll be back in a year to plug the next book.
Excellent, good stuff. Yeah, I mean, every time a new article of yours drops, I'm like, it's like, wake up, babe! New Eric Berger article just dropped. Adrian, any final thoughts, buddy?
No, I really enjoyed this. 90 minutes really fly by, and I totally agree. We actually need a part 2 because we when you mentioned all the topics we missed. I'm like, yeah, we missed so much. I want to talk more.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Osiris Rex. Yay, Osiris Rex! Like, okay, cool. We can check that one off the list. All right. Thank you both for joining us, Eric. Thank you so much, man. This was a blast. I can't wait to do it again.
Always a pleasure.
Cool deal. All right, nerds. We will see you next week with more NSF Live. But until then, you can hang out at Starbase Live or McGregor Live or Space Ghost Live or any of the lives. Just go hang out. Anyways, we'll see you guys next week.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Traveling up. Roger, planet.
Water towers, fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Fighting downside at speed off. Bring in at speed off. It's orange! Orange 25! Oh my god! Oh my god! Décollage! Look at this! Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
the methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. Deep red. We don't need any more of these.
It's orange.